There are seasons in life when the greatest battles are not fought in public but in private. They are not announced with dramatic headlines or obvious warnings. Instead, they arrive quietly, wrapped in the words, actions, and influence of another person. Many people expect life's greatest challenges to come in the form of financial hardship, physical illness, or visible opposition. Yet some of the deepest struggles begin inside relationships that slowly erode peace, confidence, and clarity. Whether someone is narcissistic, highly manipulative, or consistently controlling, the experience can leave a person feeling confused, emotionally exhausted, and disconnected from who they truly are. While not every difficult person should be labeled a narcissist, there are relationships marked by persistent patterns of manipulation, domination, and emotional exploitation that deserve to be recognized for what they are. This kind of struggle often begins so subtly that you barely notice it. At first, the relationship may seem unusually exciting, supportive, or affirming. You feel seen, appreciated, and valued. The compliments are frequent, the attention feels genuine, and the connection appears almost too good to be true. Then, without warning, something begins to change. The encouragement becomes criticism. Respect becomes control. Honest conversations become arguments where you somehow end up apologizing for things you never intended. You start questioning your own memory, your own motives, and eventually your own worth. Confusion replaces confidence, and you cannot quite explain how you got there. One of the most painful aspects of emotional manipulation is that it attacks what cannot be seen. Bruises on the body may heal, but wounds to the mind and heart can linger for years if left unaddressed. A manipulative person often reshapes reality through blame, guilt, intimidation, or constant criticism. Over time, you may stop trusting your instincts because you have been taught that your feelings are always wrong, your concerns are always unreasonable, and your perspective never matters. The result is not merely emotional fatigue, but a gradual loss of confidence in your own judgment. This is why discernment matters so deeply. Discernment is the ability to recognize consistent patterns instead of being distracted by isolated moments. Everyone has bad days. Everyone makes mistakes. Healthy relationships include forgiveness, patience, and grace because no one is perfect. But when manipulation, deception, control, and disrespect become repeated patterns rather than occasional failures, wisdom calls us to pay attention. Looking honestly at repeated behavior is not an act of condemnation. It is an act of wisdom. Ignoring destructive patterns does not make them disappear. Facing them honestly is often the first step toward freedom. Many people remain trapped because they believe every conflict is their fault. They carry the impossible burden of trying to fix someone who has no desire to change. They think that if they become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, or more accommodating, the relationship will finally improve. While compassion is a beautiful quality, compassion without wisdom can become a doorway to ongoing harm. Healthy love never requires abandoning truth. Extending kindness does not mean surrendering your dignity or accepting continual mistreatment. Emotional manipulation often works because it keeps your attention fixed on the other person's reactions rather than your own well-being. You begin measuring every word before speaking, fearing how it will be interpreted. You hesitate to express honest thoughts because disagreement is met with anger, ridicule, or emotional withdrawal. Gradually, you become smaller. Your voice grows quieter. Your confidence weakens. You lose sight of the dreams, gifts, and purpose that once brought you joy because so much energy is spent trying to keep the peace. One of the greatest dangers in these relationships is the constant state of confusion they create. Peace and confusion rarely grow together. Healthy relationships may experience disagreements, but they do not thrive on chaos. They allow room for honesty, accountability, mutual respect, and growth. Manipulative relationships, on the other hand, often depend upon uncertainty. If you are constantly doubting yourself, you become easier to control. If you constantly seek another person's approval, they gain greater influence over your emotions. This is why clarity is so valuable. Truth brings stability, while manipulation thrives in confusion. There is also an important distinction between forgiveness and trust. Forgiveness releases bitterness and allows healing to begin. Trust, however, is built through consistent honesty, responsibility, and changed behavior over time. These are not the same thing. Choosing to forgive someone does not automatically require ignoring repeated patterns of harmful conduct. Real healing often includes learning how to establish wise boundaries that protect both your peace and your emotional health. Difficult relationships also reveal something significant about resilience. They expose the areas where confidence has been attached to another person's approval instead of a deeper sense of identity and purpose. When someone continually defines your value, your emotions rise and fall according to their opinions. Freedom begins when you recognize that your worth is not determined by another person's praise or criticism. No manipulative voice has the authority to define your identity. This journey toward healing is rarely instant. There may be moments when you question yourself again. Old fears may resurface. Familiar voices may tempt you to return to unhealthy patterns simply because they are familiar. Yet growth often happens one decision at a time. Each moment of choosing truth over confusion, courage over fear, and wisdom over denial strengthens your ability to recognize healthy relationships and reject destructive ones. The presence of manipulative people in this world is an unfortunate reality, but their influence does not have to determine the direction of your life. Every experience can become an opportunity to develop greater wisdom, stronger character, and clearer discernment. Pain does not have to become your identity. Confusion does not have to become your permanent condition. As understanding grows, so does the ability to recognize unhealthy patterns, make wiser choices, and build relationships rooted in mutual respect, honesty, compassion, and genuine love. The goal is not to live in fear of difficult people, but to walk forward with wisdom, recognizing that truth, healthy boundaries, and a secure sense of identity are powerful safeguards against manipulation and the confusion it seeks to create. Discernment is one of the most valuable qualities a person can develop because it allows you to see beyond appearances and recognize what is truly taking place. Many people make life-changing decisions based on emotions alone. They stay in unhealthy relationships because they remember how things used to be. They ignore repeated warning signs because they hope tomorrow will be different. They excuse harmful behavior because they are afraid of losing someone they love. While emotions are an important part of being human, they were never meant to be the sole guide for making wise decisions. Feelings can change from one moment to the next, but truth remains steady. That is why discernment is more powerful than emotion. Discernment invites you to look beyond temporary feelings and evaluate consistent patterns of behavior with honesty, wisdom, and clarity. One of the greatest challenges in emotionally manipulative relationships is that they create an environment where feelings constantly override facts. You may feel guilty for setting boundaries, even when those boundaries are necessary. You may feel responsible for another person's anger, even when their reaction is unreasonable. You may feel selfish for protecting your peace, even though you have spent years sacrificing your own emotional well-being. Manipulative individuals often know how to use emotions as tools of control. They may appeal to your compassion, your loyalty, your fear of conflict, or your desire to be accepted. Over time, these emotional pressures can become so familiar that you begin making decisions simply to avoid discomfort rather than pursuing what is right. Discernment calls you to pause before reacting. Instead of asking, "How do I feel right now?" it asks, "What do the facts consistently reveal?" This shift changes everything. A single apology may sound sincere, but has the behavior actually changed? One kind gesture may be encouraging, but does it erase months or years of disrespect? One peaceful week may feel hopeful, but has the overall pattern become healthier, or is this simply another cycle that will soon repeat? Discernment teaches you to evaluate character through consistency rather than isolated moments. Patterns tell stories that isolated events cannot. Every healthy relationship experiences misunderstandings and occasional failures because every human being is imperfect. A loving friend may disappoint you. A family member may lose their temper. A spouse may make mistakes. These isolated moments should not define an entire relationship if genuine accountability, humility, and growth follow. However, when deception, manipulation, blame shifting, criticism, and emotional control become regular patterns, wisdom requires you to pay attention. Repeated behavior reveals priorities, values, and intentions more clearly than carefully chosen words ever will. Many people struggle with discernment because hope is a powerful emotion. Hope is beautiful when it inspires perseverance, but it becomes dangerous when it blinds us to reality. Someone may continue hoping that a controlling person will suddenly become respectful, that a chronic liar will become honest without taking responsibility, or that someone who refuses accountability will eventually change simply because enough time has passed. Genuine transformation is certainly possible for anyone who sincerely desires it, but lasting change is demonstrated through consistent actions over time, not repeated promises that are never fulfilled. Another obstacle to discernment is the fear of being wrong. People sometimes ignore warning signs because they do not want to believe that someone they love could intentionally manipulate them. Admitting the truth can feel painful because it forces difficult decisions. It may require setting boundaries, having uncomfortable conversations, or accepting that the relationship is not what you hoped it would be. For this reason, many people choose temporary comfort instead of lasting clarity. Yet avoiding truth does not remove its consequences. Reality remains unchanged whether we acknowledge it or not. Discernment also protects us from confusing kindness with weakness. Being compassionate does not mean allowing ourselves to be repeatedly mistreated. Being forgiving does not require tolerating endless disrespect. Being patient does not mean ignoring behaviors that continue causing harm. Healthy love includes wisdom. It recognizes that protecting your emotional well-being is not selfish, but responsible. Boundaries are not barriers against love. They are safeguards that allow healthy relationships to flourish while limiting opportunities for ongoing manipulation. Emotions often fluctuate according to circumstances. You may wake up feeling confident one day and discouraged the next. Stress, exhaustion, disappointment, and uncertainty can all influence your feelings. If every decision depends entirely upon emotion, your direction in life will constantly change. Discernment provides stability because it is rooted in observation, truth, and thoughtful reflection rather than temporary emotional reactions. It encourages patience before making major decisions while also preventing endless delay when evidence has already become clear. One of the clearest signs that discernment is developing is the ability to notice repeated cycles. Manipulative relationships often follow predictable patterns. There may be periods of affection followed by criticism, conflict followed by apologies, promises followed by disappointment, and brief moments of peace followed by renewed control. Each cycle creates hope that things have permanently improved, only for the same behaviors to return. Without discernment, every apology feels like a fresh beginning. With discernment, you begin asking whether genuine responsibility has accompanied the apology. You learn that words alone cannot rebuild trust. Trust grows through repeated demonstrations of honesty, humility, respect, and changed behavior. Discernment also strengthens confidence in your own judgment. Emotional manipulation often causes people to question themselves constantly. They begin seeking permission for every decision because they no longer trust their own thinking. They second-guess their memories, minimize their concerns, and dismiss their instincts. As discernment grows, confidence gradually returns. You become more comfortable recognizing unhealthy dynamics without feeling obligated to justify every observation. You understand that acknowledging harmful behavior is not an act of hatred, but an act of honesty. Developing discernment requires patience because wisdom is rarely formed overnight. It grows through experience, careful reflection, learning from mistakes, listening to trusted counsel, and observing how actions consistently align or fail to align with words. Over time, your ability to recognize healthy character becomes sharper. You become less impressed by charm and more attentive to integrity. You value consistency over charisma, humility over image, accountability over excuses, and truth over appearances. These qualities help you build relationships founded on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. When discernment becomes stronger than emotion, decisions become healthier, relationships become wiser, and peace becomes more stable. You stop chasing temporary reassurance and begin valuing lasting truth. Instead of reacting impulsively to every emotional wave, you develop the confidence to evaluate situations carefully, recognizing that genuine love is revealed not merely through attractive words or emotional intensity, but through consistent respect, honesty, responsibility, and unwavering integrity demonstrated over time. One of the greatest tragedies of emotional manipulation is that its deepest damage is often invisible. While people may notice arguments, distance, or tension in a relationship, they rarely see what is happening inside the heart and mind of the person being controlled. The true target is not merely your happiness, your confidence, or even your peace. The real target is your identity. When someone consistently manipulates, criticizes, belittles, or controls another person, they gradually attempt to redefine how that individual sees themselves. The battle shifts from external circumstances to internal beliefs. Once a person begins doubting who they are, every area of life becomes vulnerable. Identity is the foundation upon which every decision is built. It shapes your confidence, influences your relationships, determines how you respond to challenges, and affects the dreams you pursue. A healthy identity allows you to stand firm even when circumstances become difficult because your value is not determined by temporary success or failure. However, when identity becomes weakened, uncertainty begins to influence every choice. A person who no longer believes in their own worth will often accept treatment they would have rejected years earlier. They lower their expectations, silence their voice, and begin believing they deserve less than respect, kindness, and honesty. This process rarely happens overnight. It usually begins with small moments that seem insignificant at first, a sarcastic comment disguised as humor, constant criticism presented as helpful advice, blame that somehow always finds its way back to you, conversations where your feelings are dismissed while the other person's emotions dominate every discussion. Gradually, these experiences accumulate. One criticism may not seem devastating, but thousands of negative messages repeated over months or years begin shaping how you see yourself. Eventually, the voice of the manipulative person becomes louder than your own inner confidence. One of the most destructive tactics used by emotionally controlling individuals is making you question your own perception of reality. You remember something one way, but they insist it happened differently. You express genuine hurt, yet they accuse you of being too sensitive. You raise a legitimate concern, and suddenly the conversation becomes about your flaws instead of the issue you wanted to address. Over time, you begin wondering whether your memory can be trusted, whether your emotions are valid, or whether your judgment is reliable. This confusion weakens your confidence and makes you increasingly dependent on the very person creating the uncertainty. As confidence fades, independence often fades with it. You begin looking to someone else to define your value, approve your decisions, and validate your emotions. Instead of asking yourself whether something is right, you begin asking whether they will approve. Their opinions become more important than your convictions. Their moods determine your peace. Their approval becomes the reward you constantly chase, even though it remains just beyond your reach. This endless pursuit keeps many people trapped in unhealthy relationships because they believe that if they can just become good enough, patient enough, or understanding enough, they will finally receive the acceptance they have been seeking. Unfortunately, manipulation is rarely satisfied by compliance. Once someone gains influence through control, they often seek even greater control. The standards continually change. What pleased them yesterday is no longer enough today. What they once praised becomes another reason for criticism. This creates emotional exhaustion because the finish line is constantly moving. No matter how hard you try, you feel as though you are always falling short. The problem, however, is not your inability to meet reasonable expectations. The problem is that unreasonable expectations were never designed to be met. One of the saddest consequences of losing your identity is forgetting your own strengths. People who were once joyful become anxious. Those who are confident become hesitant. Creative individuals stop pursuing their passions because they have been convinced their ideas are foolish. Natural leaders begin doubting every decision. Kind-hearted people start believing they are difficult to love. The gifts, talents, and unique qualities that once brought life and purpose become buried beneath layers of fear, insecurity, and self-doubt. The world may still see the same person on the outside, but inside they no longer recognize themselves. This internal struggle also affects relationships beyond the manipulative one. Someone whose identity has been weakened may struggle to trust healthy people because they have become accustomed to criticism and control. Genuine kindness feels unfamiliar. Respect seems suspicious. Honest encouragement is difficult to accept because it contradicts the negative beliefs they have carried for so long. Healing, therefore, involves more than escaping an unhealthy relationship. It requires rebuilding the way you think about yourself, learning once again to receive healthy love, constructive feedback, and sincere encouragement without expecting hidden motives. Reclaiming your identity begins with recognizing an important truth. Another person's treatment of you does not determine your value. People often project their own insecurities, fears, and unhealthy patterns onto those around them. Their criticism may reveal more about their own struggles than about your character. This does not mean ignoring personal mistakes or refusing accountability. Everyone has areas where growth is needed. Yet there is a profound difference between accepting constructive correction that promotes growth and absorbing constant criticism that destroys confidence. One builds character, the other erodes identity. Healing also requires replacing distorted beliefs with truthful ones. If you have spent years hearing that you are incapable, you must learn to recognize your abilities again. If you have been told that your opinions never matter, you must practice using your voice. If you have been convinced that your needs are always selfish, you must discover that healthy relationships involve mutual care, respect, and consideration. Every healthy decision becomes another step toward rebuilding the confidence that manipulation attempted to destroy. As identity grows stronger, fear gradually loses its influence. You no longer feel compelled to explain every decision or seek constant approval. You become comfortable saying no without overwhelming guilt. You stop measuring your worth by another person's reactions. Instead of living to avoid criticism, you begin living according to wisdom, integrity, and conviction. Confidence returns not because life becomes perfect, but because your sense of value is no longer controlled by someone else's opinions. A secure identity transforms every area of life. It influences the friendships you choose, the boundaries you establish, the opportunities you pursue, and the challenges you are willing to face. You begin recognizing that genuine love never requires you to abandon your dignity, silence your convictions, or surrender your sense of self. Healthy relationships encourage growth rather than control, honesty rather than confusion, and mutual respect rather than domination. When your identity is rooted in truth instead of manipulation, you become far less vulnerable to voices that seek to diminish your worth because you understand that lasting confidence is built upon who you truly are rather than upon the changing opinions of those who attempt to define you.